Welcome back to Act Local. Did you hear about the end of native logging in Victoria? I did, but I didn't know what it meant. So I took the train down to Melbourne to meet Schuringa of the Victorian Forest Alliance to ask her all about the end of native logging.
It's a massive announcement, a monumental win. The government had a plan to end native forest logging in 2030 and they've brought that forward by 6 years.
And let's start at the start as well. What is it?
Native forest logging is a destructive industrial clear fell practice where basically a crew of maybe 5 or 6 loggers are in an area, they basically scalp it, and the trees in Victoria are mostly heading to a paper mill and basically disposable products that end up in landfill after a couple of months. It happens across Victoria on a pretty massive scale. It impacts water quality, it takes out trees that are habitat for threatened species. Forests are some of the most carbon dense forests in the world, so they're really important for climate change. And when you take those trees out, you're removing carbon that was safely stored for hundreds of years, even longer.
Don't attack me, but a lot of people will be saying through their phone, if they don't really, are not crazy into it, trees are regenerative.
Yeah, the trees grow back.
The trees go back. What do you say to those sorts of people that are like, well, who cares? If we just take it away, we just plant more trees, the trees come back and we can start the cycle again.
There was some research that was done a couple of years ago that showed the logging was so intense that trees weren't actually growing back. Yeah, there you go. It takes hundreds of years for them to become habitat for threatened species and store that same amount of carbon, so they don't have anywhere near the value that these older forests have, mature forests have. Those younger forests that do come back, if they do grow back after logging, they're much more flammable and prone to bushfires.
And why is that?
The young trees that come up, they suck a lot of water out of the soil, and they also become kind of like a big area of kindling and basically a matchbox.
Now that my certified smooth brain understands the impacts of native forest logging, I wanted to know where Chris and the Victorian Forest Alliance fit into all of this.
There's a lot of community forest groups across Victoria fighting for an end to native forest logging, and we saw it was really important that all of these groups come together across the state to strategise and work together to see an end to native forest logging, which all of these community groups were fighting for in their own little patch. And we just saw an opportunity for bigger collaboration, solidarity, and so that's how the Victorian Forest Alliance started. I am very privileged to be the coordinator of the campaign. Sometimes you're up against some really heavy hitters in the logging industry that are present in those regional towns, and it can feel kind of, isolating, it can feel threatening at times. Knowing that there's a whole bunch of other people across the state who are experiencing these similar things and working together to achieve something is really important. A lot of the tactics as well of how the groups operate and how they work are so diverse, and so when we learn from each other and we see this big picture of how everybody is doing their thing, I think everyone learns from each other. Like a whole bunch of people from across Victoria have come together and tackled a state-owned logging company which is backed by millions and millions and millions of dollars. And really it's a testament to community groups and the power that we have collectively. So I think if you're passionate about conservation, if you're passionate about wildlife and you want to do something about it, just get a crew together and join with other people and learn from other campaigns, because there's so much good work that's happening out there. And the Alliance really shows that you're so much stronger when you're working with a whole bunch of people who are really passionate about something.
Give me some examples about how we're trying to stop the logging companies coming through.
Some direct intervention kind of things, like looking for threatened wildlife in areas that are scheduled for logging. Another one is direct action, so where people actually go in and physically put themselves in a situation to stop the logging. And then also a lot of the...
Can I just stop you there? Is that like actually tying yourself to trees and stuff? And again, don't attack me. Is that working positively? You hear people do it and then you go, the greenies are at it again. You know what I mean? Like, you want to talk about other things, but I think these are things that people are going to go, well, that's not going to do anything because you're just tying yourself to a tree for a bit, and then eventually you piss off and then they go through it. What's the plan then?
A lot of the time, people do try talking to the government and saying, we're a local community group and we don't want to see this forest flattened. And most often than not, that doesn't work.
It's
Yes,
whatever.
yeah. Head in the sand. Kind of buy a bit of time if you want to start doing legal action or look for the critters that might be in that place. Yeah, you don't get a lot of notice of when they're actually going to start logging, and sometimes it's really helpful to have an action to be able to pause things. And I think it's also good just to take a stand as well, just to say, this is not acceptable, and we want to do anything we can to try and stop it.
Well, this is how much it means to us, really.
There are a bunch of different tactics that are used, and they're all really important and serve a really great purpose. I think looking for animals is a really effective one. Citizen science is really important. Legal action is really important, and also lobbying and talking to the general public. And there's already been polling to show that most Victorians, they don't support native forest logging. So we know that the public is kind of on the right side of history and supports it. And so it's really important to talk to people about what they can do to help the issue, share it so that people know what's going on.
What happens now? The year is 2025. Native logging is gone. What happens now? Is it just battling for those little nitty-gritty bits to really get it exactly the way you want, or is there any other stuff that you need to be fighting?
Until Vic Forest is abolished, which is that state-owned logging company, I think people will still be fighting. Like, if they're around, I don't think people will be super happy. They're not very trustworthy. They've broken the law. Our citizen science program a couple of weeks ago discovered that Vic Forest had illegally logged some threatened plant species, which they were supposed to protect, while doing regeneration. So they were going into an area to try and basically churn up the soil or whatever so that the trees would come back. And instead they went in there and bulldozed plants that were meant to be protected. So it's like, don't know if these guys should be trusted with that really important work.
It feels like a lot of just like, look over here.
Nothing to see here. So many areas have been terribly impacted by logging for so long. That's going to need a lot of work doing regeneration. We want to see that kind of led by scientists and First Nations people, not by logging industry interests. Especially out in Western Victoria, there are these weird other kind of logging that happens under different names. And
Can we go into that? What does that mean? What is the weird sort of logging?
What we call disaster logging, which is basically like a disastrous event happens, like a bushfire or a storm, and then the loggers go in after those events and kind of what they call salvage trees from that area that have been impacted by fire or storm damage. And science tells us that it's one of the most damaging forms of logging that you can do, and it's very likely that that kind of logging will continue.
And why is it so damaging?
Areas that go through a really horrible event like that really need time to recover. So going into an area with heavy machinery and basically churning up the soil and doing more damage on top of it, just trying to recover, it's not good news.
People would have thought, well, that makes the most sense to go into. But no, apparently not.
And a lot of the times it happens in really remote places or areas where you don't see it. It's behind locked gates. The government tries very hard to hide what's going on, because if people see it, they're like, why the hell is this still happening? This is awful.
Yes, there's still a bunch of work to go, but what the Victorian Forest Alliance has been able to achieve is nothing short of epic. If you know another legend or organisation doing amazing things to protect our natural world, comment below. If not, I'll just see you on another episode of Act Local. Kisses.